Good morning and welcome to the L2 Defense Behind Every Hero webinar series. Thank you everyone for chiming in as to where you are watching from today. The next voice you will hear from is our COO of L2 Defense, Mr. Rich Murphy.
Good morning. I'm Richard Murphy, Chief Operating Officer here at L2 Defense. And on behalf of Sam Lennon, our owner and Chief Executive Officer, and the more than 250 full-time, part-time independent contractors that make up our team, I'd really like to welcome you all to today's webinar. You know, at L2 Defense, our motto is behind every hero. That motto is what drives us when we're interacting with our partners, customers, from the military, first responder, and private sector. It is what L2 does. I do want to just talk for just a minute, community best practices. Everybody is muted on purpose except for the panelists. We ask, as Lakeisha has already mentioned, that you please use the chat function and the question button at the bottom of the page should you have questions. We will have about 15 minutes at the end of today's webinar for an opportunity for our panelists to answer some of the questions that are presented. But as you can see, it'll be impossible for us to be able to do that with over 500 participants signed in already, and we're anticipating possibly more than 1,000. So allow me to introduce Mr. Russell Accardi. Russ is the Director of the Public Safety Division here at L2 Defense. Mr. Accardi has more than 38 years of experience in the fire service, emergency management, natural and man-made disaster responses. He serves as a hazardous materials and weapons of mass destruction response member on the FEMA Improvised Nuclear Device Working Group. Mr. Accardi has served over 20 years as a hazmat specialist and search team manager for the Task Force 2 FEMA Urban Search and Rescue here in South Florida. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce Mr. Russ Accardi.
Thank you, Rich. And I just want to introduce the two speakers for today's session. The first is Chief Jadallah. He's a 25-year veteran of the fire service, 21 of which are with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue. The Deputy Fire Chief of Operations leads approximately 2,100 employees responding to emergency calls throughout Miami-Dade County. As part of his portfolio, Chief Jadallah is also responsible for the Special Operations Division, managing assets such as Miami-Dade Fire Rescue's air rescue units, marine services, lifeguards, hazmat, technical rescue, SWAT medic, and the Florida Task Force 1 team. Additionally, all airport operations operating from the 3 county airports are overseen by Chief Jadallah. Chief Jadallah has been a member of FEMA Florida Task Force 1 since 2003. Our second presenter, Dave Downey, is a 38-year veteran of the fire service working through the ranks as a firefighter, company officer, battalion chief, division chief, and assistant fire chief. Chief Downey retired as the fire chief of Miami-Dade Fire Rescue in May 2019 after serving in that capacity for 6.5 years. Dave currently serves as the Deputy Coordinator for the State of Florida ESF 4 and 9 Statewide Emergency Response Plan. Chief Downey is an active member of Florida Task Force 1 Urban Search and Rescue since 1991 and currently serves as one of the task force leaders. He has responded to numerous disasters domestically as well as internationally. And to begin, just to give us a sense of the incident that we're talking about. Early in the morning on June 24th, 2021, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, a 12-story apartment building partially collapsed, involving 84 of the 136 units. Miami-Dade Fire Rescue responded initially with over 100 mutual aid units, ultimately being assigned to the incident. Urban Search and Rescue resources from across the state of Florida, as well as the 5 task forces from outside the state, responded with over 400 rescuers working around the clock to accomplish search and rescue for those trapped and missing. We're joined today by Chief Raied, Chief of Operations for Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, and Dave Downey, retired Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Chief and currently working for the State Fire Marshal's office. These men are here today to discuss some of the many challenges faced during this complex disaster. Chief Jadallah and Chief Downey, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Jadallah, to start, how were you notified of the incident and what were your initial actions?
Well, first, thank you again, Russ, for the invite. So, the night of the incident, this did occur at approximately 1:30 in the morning. So one of my district commanders that operates in the field notified me by phone that he was en route to what appeared to be a high-rise building that had collapsed. Obviously, you can only imagine what's going through my head when he's telling me a high-rise building had collapsed. So, piqued interest, jumping out of bed and trying to get additional information. Once he kind of drew up the the scenario as to what transpired, obviously, some phone calls started occurring, and I got in my vehicle and started heading that direction.
Okay. And what resources did Miami-Dade Fire Rescue have available, and how were they utilized in the early hours of the incident?
So once that phone call actually came in, I started with some of the notifications. As soon as I hung up with my district commander, I notified EOC. That was the first phone call. So the EOC with the Office of Emergency Management, Emergency Operations Center, however, different agencies refer to it, currently falls under the fire department for Miami-Dade Fire Rescue. So I notified our EOC to activate level 1 based on the circumstances that was given to me. In addition to that, I made additional phone calls. I notified our urban search and rescue chief to do a mission specific for a building collapse to get resources on scene. And then my third phone call, before I left the house, was to my special ops chief in regards to a briefing and getting certain assets to that location. Obviously, when I arrived and discussing it with the incident commander, I knew that we had just over 100 of the 155 operational units from Miami-Dade Fire Rescue on scene. In addition to that, I know that there was a declaration. So there's various package assignments when we declare certain incidents. So we had requested a high hazard assignment, which as a result of the high rise, a hazmat assignment, a technical rescue assignment. Each one of these various assignments produces package assignment of units. This also included a level 5 MCI. Now, that level 5 MCI brought quite a few resources, and of course, it brought resources from 4 of the 5 municipal agencies from Miami-Dade County, including well over a dozen agencies in Broward County. And this included, again, our own technical rescue units, hazmat units, personnel on scene that started with search and rescue operations on the inside, and of course, on the exterior, picking off victims that were trapped on balconies as a result of all exits that were blocked off on the bottom floors.
Okay. And Chief Downey, how were you notified of the incident and what were your initial actions?
So as you heard Chief Jadallah state that his first phone call was to emergency management here in Miami-Dade County. The emergency management in turn notified our state of Florida state warning point of the incident. So that set in motion a bunch of notifications, including the emergency management director and alerting the ESF 4 and 9, 4 being fire and 9 search and rescue desk at our state EOC. Under the state fire marshal's office, 4 and 9 are controlled by the state fire marshal. And so in turn, the ESF 4-9 desk called me in the early hours to alert me as the deputy coordinator of the incident. My first phone call was actually to Chief Jadallah, trying to sort out what actually was going on. Initially, the report was that this occurred in Miami Beach. In fact, it only occurred a block or 2 out of the city of Miami Beach within Miami-Dade County's jurisdiction. And Chief Jadallah had just arrived on the scene. So he gave me a quick briefing as to what they were encountering. And again, we were still in the early morning hours, and I let him know that we're aware of it from the state standpoint, and that if there's anything that they need to reach out to me.
Okay. And Chief, talk to us about the state emergency response plan and what resources the state of Florida has in that.
So under our state emergency response plan that was developed in the aftermath of Hurricane Andrew back in 1992, to coin our fire chief's famous phrase back then, Chief Paulison, who said that the best thing that ever happened to us was all the help that came. And the worst thing that ever happened to us was all the help that came, because we didn't know how to manage all these resources. So the Florida Fire Chiefs and the State Fire Marshal's office put together a statewide emergency response plan for fire rescue resources. And this plan now has kind of developed over the years. First, it was specific to fire rescue vehicles and personnel. And then as the urban search and rescue and hazardous materials functions developed, it expanded to include those functions, because here in Florida, those are fire-based. And it also includes a communications component as well as a dispatchers component. And those are all rolled into our statewide emergency response plan. In the hierarchy, there's a coordinator for the state of Florida, and then a deputy. And I'm the deputy. And then our state is divided up into 7 regions. There's 7 regional coordinators, and it kind of distills down from there.
Okay. And Chief Jadallah, discuss the initial command structure location, the challenges, and how it evolved into the incident management team.
So the initial incident command, obviously we follow the NIMS ICS. So as I mentioned, we had various package assignments, and I referenced package assignments, meaning the different types of incidents that this kind of led up to. So once the first arriving unit gave their size up and established command, a battalion chief arrived and received the report, and a transfer of command had occurred. Now we have various assignments for subsequent battalion chiefs that do arrive, and they play various roles: planning section, safety officer, branch director, division groups. Those are all established by within that first 30 minutes. As the scene continued to escalate, this included a mass casualty. Level 5 was declared. So we had the EMS component that we were also concerned about. When I had arrived, and it was roughly 2:30, 2:40 in the morning, I received a briefing from my district commander as to what was going on. As soon as I got the briefing, I made another phone call to our planning section team. Now, this is Nick Margato. He oversees our planning section. Basically, it's one of the many positions that we have with the department's incident management team. We're fortunate enough, and it's one of those double-edged swords, because of the hurricane season, 6 months out of the year, we actually have a hurricane table of organization that fills every position. And what we do is, for major incidents of this nature, we actually utilize those same individuals to fill those roles, and it actually benefited us. So that phone call went to him. He was basically my 4th phone call. And that was basically once I arrived and told him to get the incident management team rolling, at least the planning section team, and so we could start up with the process. But initially, we utilized troops in the in the field, the battalion chiefs, EMS captains, etc., including district commanders. And by 8 a.m., leading into the first operational period, we were already rolling with our incident management team from the department, in a Alpha Bravo setting.
Okay, and what agencies were part of the Unified Command?
So, it's interesting. Quite a few individuals will show up and feel that it's necessary they're part of the Unified Command process. And as many of us are well aware, that's just not the case. They play a role, but maybe not necessarily a unified command. For us, the unified command process and the team consisted of Miami-Dade Fire, Miami-Dade Police, the mayor's office. Now, the mayor's office, the county mayor's office, even though the emergency management falls under the fire department, when a declaration, especially a level 1 declaration, has been given, they revert under the mayor's office. So, EOC mayor's office was a part of it, and the FEMA USAR branch was part of it. So we had 4 entities that were part of the Unified Command, and quite a few other agencies actually numerous agencies, filled other roles. And this kind of leads into actually part of the original question you asked. We established a liaison officer and some assistants, and those individuals, eventually fell under liaison. And that was a key role, is to, kind of guide everyone in the right direction. But we had four agencies that were part of the unified command process.
Very good. That liaison helps alleviate a lot of
Yes.
this. I think they need to be in that unified command and deal with those agencies. And what were some of the challenges you faced and lessons learned in that first 24 hours from a command and control standpoint?
Well, I would have to say that the incident, obviously expands very quickly, including the footprint. So one of the largest things that you have to really consider is, the footprint, the location of where the command post is. Even though that we had various command posts en route, to start mitigating this incident, just how quickly the incident escalated and the numerous agencies that, pulled up. And this goes back to making sure that if you don't have an incident management team established ahead of time, to get one moving, relatively quick, because real quick you will be overwhelmed. But I would have to venture to say that the largest challenge was the actual footprint and trying to expand, and trying to capture those individuals in various roles as they began to show up.
Very good. And Chief Downey, what is the process for deploying the state of Florida urban search and rescue assets?
So within our statewide emergency plan, we kind of have two distinct areas. We have no notice events and noticed events. And early on, the no noticed event would be the closer mutual aid resources, and then the noticed are more of a planned deployment. In this case, we had the mutual aid resources that came as part of the MCI declaration, and then we moved into the noticed. Essentially, the local emergency management agency sends a request through our web EOC system to the state requesting a specific type of resource. And this can be anything from a front end loader to a type 1 USAR team. And then it's the function of ESF 4 and 9 to go ahead and fill that request. They take all the information, they might call back. In this case, about 6 in the morning, the director of the state fire marshal his office identified me as his representative for this incident due to my locale and my experience and obviously understanding the area. And so, I was working very closely with the incident management team on scene to work through the ordering of these resources.
Okay. And what were some lessons learned from the deployment standpoint itself?
Well, the two big things that came out of this from our statewide system, and I'm very proud of our statewide emergency response plan. It's been tested since it was developed, first in the late 90s with wildfires across our state, and then in the 2000s with all of the hurricanes that we've experienced. So it's been battle tested, but there's always lessons that can be learned. One of the big things specific to USAR is the reflex time. Mobilizing a task force, getting all the equipment loaded, getting all the members in and getting them on the road takes some time, especially for the larger teams. And unlike the federal system that has an alert phase that allows a team to get ready, not necessarily get on the road, but gives them some funding and some ability to get ready, we're kind of reliant on when the activation actually happens. So building into this incident, the reflex time, if Chief Jadallah or the incident management team wanted a type 1 USAR team now, we wouldn't see it for upwards of 12 to 15 hours. So we had to build that into our thought process as far as resources. The other big thing that was learned is that there's a huge need for a lot more support for the USAR operation. You have the incident management team, but under that, there was a search and rescue group that later expanded to a branch. But there's a lot of special needs within the search and rescue community, especially with this many task forces operating. And so there's the specific logistical needs, there's planning and documentation so that we can feed the incident management team. And there's just overall coordination of the incident. So we learned early on that we're going to need a lot more assistance in just that coordination elm underneath the incident management team.
Okay. Any other lessons learned or challenges you faced in that first 24 hours?
Well, the biggest thing with any incident, just like this, and as Chief Jadallah was saying, kind of settling into the idea and the mode that this isn't going to be over in a couple hours, is the fact that we have to settle kind of into a battle rhythm. What resources do we really need? Where do we need those resources? How do we, utilize them most effectively? Some early decisions really proved to be huge here. Early ordering of the heavy equipment, and we'll probably talk about that later to assist in the search and rescue operations. And also the work cycles. The traditional round the clock work cycles would be from a daylight or 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and a nighttime 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. But early on, it was decided that, especially on the USAR side of it, we wanted to take advantage of the no sun periods of the day. And so we altered the work cycles from 12 noon till midnight, and then from midnight to 12 noon. That allowed both phases, both shifts, the Alpha and the Bravo, opportunity not to be working in the hot, humid, sunny conditions here in South Florida. So while that kind of disrupted some of the traditional incident management folks that work that traditional Alpha Bravo, it proved to be a great benefit to the search and rescue operations.
Sometimes those kind of changes based on the climate or the incident location prove to be necessary.
Absolutely.
Chief Jadallah, how did things go with the elected officials from the town, the county, state, and federal levels? What are some lessons learned there?
It went relatively smooth. That morning of, I want to say that the town of Surfside, this incident occurred obviously in the town of Surfside. The mayor was actually on scene probably around 3 a.m. Manager followed, right after that. And between the county mayor, the town mayor, the managers, all the elected officials that have some form of role, everyone was treated accordingly, and goes back to the establishing of responsibilities. Again, not everyone can be part of the unified command process, or unified command team, but they need to play some form of role. And in this situation, everyone had some type of role. In addition to it, all the elected officials, that technically wanted a role as part of this incident, they were briefed. We had numerous briefings where it started off with the unified command process. Once we established our objectives, we would have the briefing with the elected officials and went from there. So they were never in the dark, especially at the town of Surfside. Individuals that needed to kind of voice some concerns, they had constant access to us. But not one time that I could recall, and Chief Downey could probably also chime in, but not one time that I could recall was there any disruption as a result of their beliefs or their objectives, etc. Fortunately, every time that we provided them an objective or a concern during the unified command briefings, they followed suit with the recommendations of the incident management team. So there was never bumping of the heads. So it worked out extremely well.
Very good. And how were the press briefings managed? What was your role? And were there any lessons learned you can share with other senior leaders on that?
All right. So the first part in regards to, you said what was it in regards to
press briefings? How did you manage the press briefings? I know you played a major role early on. We saw you and you were doing more than one a day. So that was obviously a challenge.
Right. So in the early incident, my role was, overseeing the operations of the entire incident. So I functioned as an agency rep over the incident commander for Miami-Dade Fire. So the initial first day or two, they were having briefings that were managed by the Joint Information Center, the JIC. which was established early. And even though I made certain, going back to the early incident, even though I made certain phone calls, understand at the same time, we had, the fire alarm office, which oversees all of our, incidents, were making their notifications and according to policy and procedures. So, the fire chief, our, PIO, media relations, various entities were being notified. So concurrently, so by 5, 6 a.m., 90% of those that needed to be there were there. And by the first operational period, they were there. So the JIC is one of them. I want to say that, Erica Benitez, our media relations, was there by 3 a.m., 4 a.m. also, working with establishing the JIC, at the, not only at the county level, but eventually at the regional level. So the initial briefings were, several, quite a few, every day. Then, it led to, and it was something that we discussed with the mayor's office. It was something in regards to what transpired during the Family Assistance Center. The media relation or the press briefings were then limited to twice a day. This didn't include personal interviews, but twice a day. And it had to deal with, the buy-in from the families. But I think, it's something that we'll discuss, down the road. But, it was always, in regards to the actual briefings themselves, it always came from one entity, one site, one, specific group. So there was no misinformation in regards to what was being communicated.
Yes. And I know a topic of interest to many of the viewers is that of your primary role was the fire department representative to the families. There were some unique challenges I hear that you had to overcome dealing with the family assistance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a topic by itself. It's probably an hour or so. So I functioned, as I said, I had functioned as the agency rep. Once I arrived on scene, I established our incident management team, the Alpha Bravos, the incident commanders. During that first operational period, the fire chief in the mayor's office had asked me if I could, brief the families as to the technical aspects and pretty much bring it down to their level. I said, absolutely. So that next day, I want to say, and it becomes a kind of a blur, but that next day I had that meeting with the family as to discuss, what was going on, the search and rescue operations, et cetera. Obviously, it became very emotional. I realized that the families hadn't received much information. And at that point, I kind of put the load on my own shoulders. Though it's not a position I typically would ever fill, it's a position I volunteered for and continued to fill until we placed the incident under control. One of the things that we had in regards to discussion with the families is truth and transparency. I had told them over the course of the next day or two after I first started with the briefings with the family members, we would do it twice a day, first thing in the morning and then again in the afternoon. In conjunction with that, this is where we had the discussion with the Unified Command, with the mayor's office, the politicians, where we limit the information that was going out to media, that the families would hear it from me first before media got it. And it was a point of contention the first day where, there was allegedly no information to provide the families, but there was quite a bit of it on media. So to get the buy-in from the families, we assured them that moving forward, I had requested that all the information goes to the families. As soon as I had the briefing with the families, then the briefings with the media would occur. One of the things that we learned, especially with this Family Assistance Center, is, and I'll just use myself as an example. Incidents of this nature, especially, they're going to be long-term, not maybe 1 or 2 operational periods, but long-term, several weeks. You got to have an individual that can speak on behalf of whatever the Unified Command, not an individual that needs to go and get answers for the families. They may know the answers, but they're reluctant to give the answers. I can tell you right now that most of this, about 90% of the information that was always asked, I gave it to them right then and there. There was never a time where I hid any information. And the other 10%, if I didn't have it, I followed up with them. I would take the question, followed up with them the very next, briefing. And it's something that paid, it really worked out extremely well for us. So there was no this concept of something is being hidden in regards to what's going on, with the search and rescue. And obviously there was, there were some challenges. Unfortunately, when incidents of this nature occur, a building that collapses, the first question that everyone's going to ask is it terrorist related? And initially we felt that it wasn't terrorist related, but we didn't understand the concept of what transpired. So when we don't have initial answers as to why a building fell, there's always going to be this trust issue between government and the families. To add kind of a handicap, I would have to say is, my background being Palestinian, Muslim, Islamic, where 85–90% of those involved in the collapse, had Jewish backgrounds. So there was, and it came up a few times, but I assured them that it's not an issue. And by the third day, leading into the fourth day, they saw that it had no bearing to, religious, implications. Matter of fact, that over the course of time, because of the truth and transparency and the constant dialogue and caring and compassion and answering every question, even though it was asked 50 times, you answer it, as if it's the first time being asked, that it literally, probably established, and I don't mean it in a morbid way, success in regards to not just the incident, but, to government and to Miami-Dade Fire Rescue.
I know there was a lot of challenges, and that part was a major component of this response, and you were front and center on that. Could you also speak about the site visit that was conducted with the families and how that had an impact on the overall family assistance?
Yeah, hey, you have a gut feeling. Everyone, that's a first responder or anyone that really loves, their profession, sometimes wants to go on a ledge. And, I had kind of wanted to bring the families to the site early. And part of the reason was that it was an uphill battle for me in regards to the internet misinformation. No matter how much I could provide them, including pictures, videos, links of real-time videos, where they got to see that other people did not get to see, there was just this constant, trust issue. And unfortunately, with individuals, that typically are not internet savvy, they just don't understand where they're getting their information from. So getting it from a blog or getting it from a text message, it really was an issue. And I had mentioned something to Chief Downey before, that one of the things that we were dealing with was, and unfortunately, it's just how society is. You have a small percentage where they were taking screenshots or pictures, and they were photoshopping the first responders off the pile. Or they were actually photoshopping first responders on picnic tables around the pile. This is the stuff that we had to deal with. Then we would get a screenshot of workers kind of standing around the pile and trying to explain to the families that it's not that they're just standing there. It was the period of time where we had to run the dogs, or we had to run the cameras and the listening devices. It was just a constant, trying to provide them the information. So one of the things I had to do was, I felt that it was necessary to get the families there early. It's one of those things that if something bad would have gone in regards to the circumstances with getting the families there, I probably would not be sitting here before you. I made it very clear. I'm sure you can imagine how that conversation went during the Unified Command briefing. There was a lot of apprehension, especially early. I assured them that this is the right thing to do, and they gave it to me. And by the fourth day, that Sunday, we basically bussed in 4 trips, just over 400 family members, immediate family members, to the building that was just north, which is a hotel on the pool deck. and they were literally about 100 feet from the actual, debris pile. They got to see everything and they got to smell everything. And unfortunately, it's just, a necessary need in regards to what the families needed to see and hear. They saw, the constant machinery, the heavy machinery, the well over several hundred first responders on the pile. This is information that was, again, misinformation that was being given to the family members that there was nothing being done. But they got to see it with their own eyes. They got to see a first responder, unfortunately, because as Chief Downey had mentioned, you've got, South Florida weather during the summer, just wait 5 minutes and it shifts. It goes from 115-degree heat index to a severe, thunderstorm. They got to see a first responder, unfortunately, tumble down, the pile, got cut up, and quickly brushed himself off, only to get back on the pile. And you can only imagine, the smell that they got to, encounter. That alone, that circumstance alone, that visit ultimately shifted the perception of, what the first responders were doing on site. And if there was any success to this entire incident, it was getting those family members there early, getting them close, and getting them the opportunity to provide some form of closure. I would venture to say that 80%, Russ, I would say 80% of those people that arrived pretty much had their own conclusion of what the outcome was going to be, no matter what they chose. But I could tell you that right after that specific site visit, it was a completely different circumstance with all the family briefings moving forward.
I appreciate all of that, because I know our listeners, that's a big component that I've heard a lot of discussion on, dealing with families, and that's always a challenge for a lot of these big disasters. So we definitely appreciate all of that insight. Chief Downey, getting back to the search and rescue operation, what was the strategy and how were some of the resources utilized for that?
Well, again, the typical search and rescue strategy is that of, removing any surface victims, any of those lightly trapped. That was all done in the first few hours very effectively by Miami-Dade. And then we got into the more specific locating or attempting to locate void spaces. Were they survivable spaces? So as you heard from Chief Jadallah, we focused a lot on utilizing our canines, running the dogs, looking for any areas of interest, using our optical abilities and our listening devices to search through some of the rubble to try to locate any of the void spaces. I mean, that was our goal in the rescue operations, was to find any possibility of survivable void spaces. We utilized all of the task forces kind of together. They were either on the Alpha or the Bravo shift, and all the rescue squads were merged together. So you'd actually have to go up and look at their patch to figure out where they were from, because we took the typical 4 rescue squads in a task force and force multiplied them into 14 to 16 rescue squads that worked constantly, 30 minutes to 45 minutes on the pile. Then they'd come off and rehab, and another group would go up there so that we could maintain the tempo.
And Chief, what were some of the logistical challenges faced bringing over 400 rescuers to the site, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for multiple weeks?
So as you heard from Chief Jadallah, the footprint kept expanding, not any different with the USAR resources. And with the USAR resources, everybody kind of has inherent with their task force a base camp. But what we realized was we can't have 8 to 10 individual base camps, but rather it would be more beneficial in the future to have one large base camp to house our rescuers. The other big issue was the resupply. I mean, they were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, heavy breaching, breaking, and moving concrete. And one of the things that the state of Florida logistics section did early on is they contracted with an outside vendor to provide the majority of the breaching and breaking equipment, so that the task force's equipment could be kept in a state of readiness. And if there was any breakage or any need to replace the equipment, they were on hand right there, able to change out the equipment readily. That proved to be a huge benefit to this operation. And moving forward, We're actually supplying our state logistics with the cash needs of the task forces so that they can get that going early on in one of these incidents, especially if it's in an area that may not be as resource rich as we see here in South Florida.
Okay. And just for some of the viewers that are not familiar with it, what was the role of the FEMA USAR incident support team?
So, the initial stages of this, when it moved from the local event to a statewide event, I spoke previously about the coordination of the USAR resources. We certainly didn't have the bandwidth locally of personnel to be able to fulfill some of those needs. So I requested through the incident management team, one of FEMA USAR's incident support teams to be deployed. FEMA had already alerted several task forces at an incident support team in anticipation of providing help, and they were able to respond. And what we got was a cadre of subject matter experts with a tremendous amount of experience that could move right into that search and rescue branch and help coordinate the activities day in and day out. It proved to be a tremendous benefit to the USAR operation, and I think Chief Jadallah would echo these, that it became a benefit to the incident management team overall.
Very good. And Chief Jadallah, what were some of the challenges you faced, expected, and did not anticipate with this incident?
Well, I would have to venture to say that, obviously, the actual timeline in regards to how long this was going to take, coupled with, one of the biggest concerns I had is, and again, it's one of those numerous, activations, notifications from the fire alarm, is mental health of our personnel. It impacted us relatively hard, especially the first arriving units. Many of them just, the sheer concern of getting the individuals out. So much so that, we've actually had a few individuals that retired a few days after this incident from the arrival of the first arriving companies. Just again, in regards to that, it would really be, that mental health component.
Right, understand. And Chief Downey, same question for you.
So, you already heard it. We expected the weather. We dealt with the weather. We dealt with the heat, the humidity, the storms. We didn't anticipate, it seemed like every day there was another inject. Ray and I would talk, and it seemed like you were going through ICS training, and just when you felt comfortable, they'd throw another curveball at you. From the fire that started as just a small smoldering fire, that increased to a point where we had to stop search operations to get a handle on the fire, to the decision to implode the existing building so that we could get search and rescue. And then the other one, while every disaster I've ever been a part of, there's always these rules of engagement. The specific religious needs and concerns of the Jewish faith had to be adhered to in these rescue operations. And so that was something that had to be developed, implemented, and again, it went into place flawlessly. So, you move with the challenges, you work through the problem, and you keep moving forward.
Just to add up on that, in regards to the religious implications, where, I guess historically when a body is found, that's photographed and removed, with the religious implications, with how the recovery of the body, it would take, between 1 to 2 hours to photograph and remove the body in accordance to religious, rites. Obviously, it's something that, we had no problems doing, but it's just one of those, delays that we, would not have considered. And of course, it's like everything else, the hurricane that was impending. This also, threw us for a loop. This caused us, some additional delays. And this, of course, led to some concerns as a result of the building itself. Come to find out on day 2, if I remember correctly, Chief Downey, that the debris itself was holding up that building. And with a impending, hurricane that was about to hit us, which obviously got downgraded to a tropical storm, our concern that that building would come down uncontrolled as a result of the wind. So yes, every time, every day, there was some new inject that was thrown at us, but I have to say that we were able to manage it, and the objectives were met.
I know we're getting close to the end to allow for questions and answers, and there's a few that I know topics that are of great interest to a lot of the viewers, but I know there's some of the lessons that you want to share, both you and Chief Downey, about the heavy equipment that was utilized, the private contractors. So if maybe you guys can just speak briefly on that so we can get to that tough decision about going from rescue to recovery, which I think is a real important one.
So in regards to the heavy equipment, so typically fire departments, we're a very large department, probably one of the top 10 departments in regards to resources. And you don't need to necessarily have heavy machinery on hand, but you need to have the ability to access it. And that's one thing that we do have. Even though we have, small amounts of heavy machinery, we actually have contracts in place, for incidents of this nature, and we were able to tap into it right away. But unfortunately, the one thing that I want to address is, for those who are not familiar with Miami-Dade County, every piece of heavy machinery is in use. And though we were able to get heavy machineries, and an actual crane no later than that night, the largest crane unfortunately wasn't available for almost 2 or 3 days, which was located up in Tampa, and that needed to be dismantled, loaded on several tractor trailers, police escort. So you need to have those contracts in place, even though you may never execute them, but you need to have that in place, because I can tell you right now, that was one of the biggest discussions with family members, is just reassuring them that we do have the equipment here and or en route.
Very good. And Chief Downey, I know there might be some more on the heavy equipment, and also we want to talk about that decision process about the demolition of the remaining structure. So maybe hit however you feel would be beneficial to the viewers.
Well, I think, Chief Jadallah hit all the points with the heavy equipment. It's necessary, it provides that surgical removal of the debris so that we can unearth any potential void spaces. But again, it's the reflex time and where this stuff is going to come from. With respect to the demolition, again, I think Chief Jadallah hit the big points, which was the impending storm. We knew from day one that eventually that building would have to come down. And we certainly wanted to be able to control how it came down rather than uncontrolled. Painstaking effort went into preparing the building and preparing the site that we referred to as the historic rubble, or the holy rubble, that was already being searched, so that in the event part of that building did implode and come down on that, we would know where we had left off. Fortunately, the building dropped right in its footprint as the contractor had promised, and we were able to resume search and rescue operations, I think about 30 minutes post implosion. So everything happened very, very quickly, certainly from everybody in the command side, and I'm sure everybody on the scene. There was a sense of relief that we've brought down this potential secondary collapse.
Very good. And I know
Mr. Accardi,
Yeah.
Chief Downey and Chief Jadallah, you have provided a wealth of knowledge and perspective into today's topic. And thank you so much for everything you have done up until this point. Our community of over 600 attendees has posted quite a bit of questions here, and we're going to ask our L2 producer, Ricky, to assist you, Mr. Accardi, in addressing these questions with our speakers next, okay?
Lakeisha, if we could do one, I was trying to get to this one last question, which I think for the viewers is probably the most important of the whole response. And then
Sure. We have 1 minute before we go to Q&A.
The one question I know people in these kind of incidents are wanting to learn from your experience here is that tough decision on when and how to transition from rescue mode to recovery in this operation. I know there's a lot of discussion the three of us had about what you guys went through to get to that. I think that's a big lesson for everyone.
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, we talked very frequently with the incident management team as to the process, my experience, and having had done that as a fire chief on 2 separate occasions, what I went through, and what we go through in this type of environment. Ultimately, it's the decision of the of the incident management team. You know, things we look at is the type of collapse. We look at the discovery or lack of survivable void spaces, and the other compounding factors, the weather, the fire that we dealt with. Time is considered, but not a big issue. So myself, the FEMA IST personnel, other FEMA leadership, the incident management team, we spent a lot of time talking about when this transition is to occur. And the last big thing I want to stress to everybody is when we're talking about a transition from rescue to recovery, it's simply the phase in search and rescue operations. It has nothing to do with the category of reimbursement for disasters, not the response and recovery. We're talking about transitioning from rescue to recovery. And once that took place, we didn't stop the tempo. The workers maintained the tempo of 24-hour shifts, because now the goal was to bring closure to each and every one of those family members and finding their loved ones.
Yeah, leave it to three things: facts, the variables that you're encountering, and just keep emotions out of it. If you just harp on those three, you'll be fine as to when the transition needs to occur.
Thank you very much, you guys. I know Lakeisha's got a lot of questions that they're waiting to get to.
Thank you again to our panel of experts and to our L2 executive leadership team. I'm going to pass it over to Ricky, who will assist with the Q&A portion with the 9 or 8.5 minutes we have left today. And Ricky will unmute himself.
Morning, everybody. So the first question we have is from David Fischler. Was the Unified Incident Command located on or near site, or was it located off-site? Was a MAC, multi-agency coordinating group, established?
So the unified command team was established on site approximately, I would say, 300 feet, Chief, about 300 feet away. And of course, we created, tent city in regard to all the other variables. Now, as a result of the implosion that we needed to put into place, we did have to move the unified command to probably about 6 blocks down the road to structures and stuff. But we soon thereafter, we returned back to our tent city, where we established, the unified command, back out on site, approximately 200-300 feet away from the structure.
Thank you, sir. So I have a question from Chris Downey. Chief Jadallah or Chief Downey, does Florida operate regional technical rescue or hazmat teams? And were those teams able to help fill in the gap until your FEMA task force teams arrived? How did that work?
So in the state of Florida, we have 8 urban search and rescue teams across our state. 1 and 2 are also part of the federal system. And then there are various sizes from type 1 all the way to type 4. All 8 teams deployed in this incident. We also have 28 hazardous materials teams. Based on the nature of this incident, we didn't need any of those teams. And then the last thing is we have 50 light technical rescue teams across the state of Florida as well. And again, they weren't needed on this particular incident because Miami-Dade already had a local capacity with technical rescue that filled that void until the search and rescue task forces were able to get there.
Thank you, sir. My third question is from Martin Luna. How many total operational periods were run? I remember it was shut down due to the tropical storm that was coming in.
So I don't have it in front of me. So we ran it for 30 days, 2 operational period per day. Even though that we did shut down, remember the operational period doesn't, it's not suspended. Obviously the objectives are shifted, but so I want to say close to 60 operational periods, and Chief Downey could, interject from.
I think that's about right, but also I want to clarify, we never stopped operations because of the storm. We were fortunate and the storm kind of skirted us And so the only time we would stop is if there was either winds that exceeded the wind parameters of the heavy equipment or lightning in the area. If it was simply a rainstorm, we continued to work. So the only stoppage was when they prepared the existing building for implosion.
Hey, Ricky, if I can jump in, there's a couple other questions that I think might be beneficial for the team.
Copy, sir.
Chief Downey, you talked a little bit about it, but I was one of the questions comes from Emily. Can you talk a little more about how and who and how the decision to take down the building was made and the complexity involved with the decision?
Well, from my standpoint, we simply executed the decision from the IMT. From the early hours of this incident, we all knew that this building needed to come down, and we were just trying to, figure out when it would be best to do that. Certainly the impending storm accelerated the process, and I'll let Chief Jadallah speak to any of the specifics that he was involved in.
And again, just goes back to what we mentioned. We just knew it needed to come down. We knew that the debris pile itself on the east side was actually holding up, the building. Unfortunately, we did not know this until about 2 or 3 days into it. This ultimately created a zone of 40 feet, and then it got expanded to 100 feet from the pile that we were actually searching. So even though we utilized dogs and cameras and such, but we knew that, especially with that hurricane that was brewing in the Caribbean, at that point, we just could not have that building fall uncontrollably, because it goes back to optics. It would not look good if that building shifted back on top of the debris pile that we had already lifted to locate the victims. It would have been a lose-lose for all of us if that were to happen. So obviously the decision was made relatively quick, and we needed to move forward before the storm. Unfortunately, the storm skirted us.
We only have just a couple minutes left. There was a question about whether or not either of the National Guard civil support teams were deployed to the incident. Were the civil support teams, did they respond?
No, they weren't utilized on this incident. Again, the extent of the hazmat component was really the air monitoring and the decontamination. We really didn't have a large contamination area. We had a lot of internal hazardous material support within the task forces and locally that filled the void for us.
And for everybody who submitted questions, we truly appreciate your involvement. We've gotten to most of them. We're not going to be able to answer every one of them, but maybe we could finish with this one. Can you revisit the topic of integrating the FEMA USNR IST into the Unified Command, and more specifically, how did the integration look with the IMT and operational assignments?
Well, the IST is not a management team. It is a support team. And while the cell may appear large, I think at one point it grew to 24 to 28 people, they all existed within the search and rescue branch, which answered to the operations section of the incident management team. And so, again, while it seemed like a lot of people, their function was specific to the USAR operations, and they would feed any of the plans information to the incident management team plans, any of the log logistics needs to incident management team logistics, so forth and so on. So it integrated perfectly. It gave us locally the structure that we needed to control 400 plus rescuers. And it also helped in the transition. We worked these teams for 7 to 8 days, and then we rotated out another group of teams. And while they're set up for 10 days, the amount of work that they had to do here necessitated more rotation.
Yeah, awesome, Chief Downey. So I want to again thank the panelists, Russ, Chief Downey, Chief Jadallah. Thank you so much for taking the time for providing the insight. I'd like to say to all of the participants, thank you again for participating with us. You know, here at L2 Defense, there were over 100 of our subject matter experts who responded as part of some part of the rescue efforts. They're either members of the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Organization or the state and or FEMA teams. So we encourage you to take a look at it, www.l2defense.com. Take a look at the services that we provide, the training opportunities we may be able to assist your organization with. And again, just really appreciate everybody's involvement. I'd like to really thank our production crew led by Miss Lakeisha Greenwade. Great job, folks. This was a great opportunity, and as a retired fire guy, I really learned a lot. So I really appreciate it. And thanks for attending.